Grow. Grew. Grown. When you grow up, what will you be when you grow up? She grows, she learns, she improves. Her interest is growing. She grows and she will prove herself. She grows in curiosity. She is curious.
Curiosity.
Her passion is growing stronger. She grows in confidence. She grows in confidence. I will grow in confidence, prove myself, and reach my full potential. This is where ambition grows, where potential grows, and where your future grows. Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to learn about the sky at night. Cambridge is where your world grows.
And there we go. Again, welcome everybody to this month's CTE, Getting Your Students to Talk. My name is Diana Romero, and I will be hosting this session. We have some other great Cambridge academic support in the chat. So the whole gang's here. I'm reading the chat and I'm seeing everybody's joining from different parts of Mexico. We have from Michoacán. We have, of course, from Mexico City, Chihuahua. Let's see, where else? I read some other place. I read Tampico at some point as well. Yeah, I see Tampico, Puebla. So lots of different states and probably some international viewers as well. Let us know as well. Toluca, Zapopan. So welcome everybody. I'll be reading the chat. Your participation is welcome, right? This is a session for all of us to reflect, to exchange tips, and hopefully to grab some important ideas on this topic, how to get students to talk. Before we begin, let's go over housekeeping. And in this case, make sure you have your audio and a stable internet connection. Like I said, right now it's disabled, but I will be asking you to participate later on. Everybody's probably wondering, Diana, will I be getting a diploma? And of course you will, okay? Just hang on tight. I'll be sharing the QR code at the end of the session. The very, very last slide will be the QR code for your diploma. And in order for you to get your diploma, you'll have to register real quick, leave your email address, and you will be receiving your email with your diploma. You don't need to do anything else, but scan the QR code or click the link that I'll be sharing, register, and you're good to go, okay? So hang tight. It's at the very, very end of the session. And of course, if you have a nice drink, I live in Monterrey and it's kind of chilly. So if you have a nice hot cup of coffee or you preferred iced, I hope you have something. If not, grab something real quick so you enjoy the session, okay? So I'll be sharing the agenda. Today's agenda, it seems like a lot, but we'll be doing a lot of reflection, okay? We'll be talking about, well, what happens in reality? What happens in our classrooms? Why is getting students to speak a challenge, okay? We'll be talking about how to reduce anxiety. We'll be talking about how to engage students in speaking activities. We'll talk about a important question. Is it accuracy or fluency? Which one is more important? We'll talk about that. We'll have some classroom ideas that you can start implementing, some not necessarily games, but some strategies. And at the end, we have a final tips wrap up. I'll be sharing some QR codes for you to read additional information. And at the end, it's the diploma link. Okay. So hang tight. You'll be receiving it soon. So, how are we? Are we ready to go? Can I get a thumbs up? Hey, okay, amazing. Love seeing all your faces. Now, I'm going to start with a poll for all of us. If you have a computer, I see some of you are in the same room. Maybe you can answer just in that computer. For everybody else, you can use your phones, whatever electronic device to answer this poll. You should be seeing it in your screens right now. It's is speaking the most important skill? If you don't see the poll, you can write it down in the chat. But this is just a question for us to start thinking. Is speaking the most important skill? I have 80, 90 of you have already answered. Wow, over 100 answers already. And in the chat, we have yes, it is. Yes, it is. Lots of yeses. And I'll stop the poll in 3, 2, 1. Oh, beautiful. We had, actually, let me wait for 200. There we go. We have 200 answers. We have 200 answers. Let me share the results. 75% of the poll answers said, yes, it is. 25% say, I don't think so. And in the chat, we have mostly yes. And of course, some of you said, well, yes, but we can't forget about the other skills. Very, very important. So that's it. I didn't say it. 75% of you said it. It is the most important skill. Now, I'm not going to convince you otherwise. That's not the point of today's session. But I want us to think. Imagine you are visiting a foreign country, right? You can't speak the native language there. And you're looking around and you're wondering, what can I say or what do I typically say when I want to know if someone else can understand me in English, right? Perhaps Spanish in, I don't know, China might not be very common, but English. What do we typically ask if we want to know if the other person can understand me? You can use the chat. And actually, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself. If somebody wants to unmute themselves, you can.
Yes, of course. First, you gotta know, do you speak English or do you speak Spanish?
There you go. Thank you so, so much, teacher. What's your name?
Teacher Tony.
Teacher Tony, you got it. I'm gonna pause the I'll mute for a second. But teacher Tony said, hey, do you speak English, right? We don't say, do you write English? Do you know English grammar? How's your English vocabulary? And this is a little bit of a joke, right? But typically when we want to know if somebody can understand us, we say speak. So with this being said, this is why we say typically speaking is one of the most important skills to develop. I'm not saying we shouldn't develop the rest of them, but this is kind of how we'll kick things off. Now, if speaking is so important, here's another question. And I'm going to launch a poll again. You can use a poll to answer, or you can use the chat. It is, what are some challenges in getting students to speak in the classroom? You have a poll, you can type your answers. And the reason I have a poll is so I can share the answers with all of you, but you can use the chat as well. If you can't see the poll, feel free to use the chat. what are some challenges in getting students to speak in the classroom? We have in the chat vocabulary, overcoming shyness, fluency. Oh, some problems with Spanish interference. And in the poll, we have over 50 answers that I'll share in a second. Lack of vocabulary, very good. And I'll stop the poll when I have 100 answers. I have 90. In the chat, we have they don't feel secure, not motivated enough. Let me end the poll so I can show you. And on screen, you should be able to see everybody's response. We had over 100 responses, meaning that one way or another, as teachers, we have all experienced challenges in getting our students to speak. I think the great majority of us said, well, it was lack of confidence, right? Lack of motivation. And of course, if we don't have enough vocabulary, enough structures, that could be difficult as well, right? So for today's session, I only have a couple because there's a lot of interesting topics that we can kind of grab, but just for today's session, I want us to concentrate on a few. Well, both learners and teachers agree, right? Speaking is one of the most essential skills for language learning. After all, one of our goals should be communication, right? Just the ability to communicate. Yet, despite it being so important, we still see it being overshadowed in the classroom. And if we can just come up with two big challenges, I want us to think about these two: exam systems, traditional exam systems, and logistical difficulties just in the classroom, right? When I say exam systems, it's because typically when we have to grade students, many times speaking isn't considered. In your schools, teachers, do you grade speaking? Is this something you do? Is this something you do personally? Is this something everybody does? Let me know in the chat. Yes, beautiful. It's a must. Amazing. Oh, I love seeing all these. Yes. Yes, it's part of the class. Beautiful. Now, let's think about times where students have to take really important exams. For example, here in Mexico, we have the exani, right? Exani tests are those tests that students have to take when they want to get into high school or graduate university. Uh, and sometimes these exani tests, they have English. There's an English section, right? But this English section just grades, for example, vocabulary, use of English, not necessarily production skills, right? So sometimes with school exam systems, we don't really prioritize, maybe unintentionally, but we don't prioritize a lot of speaking or free speaking because we're worried about just grades, right? Just test preparation. And many times, speaking or less controlled speaking doesn't really get the attention it deserves. And if we talk about logistical difficulties, in a perfect world, we have a lot of time in the classrooms. We have a very small classroom, right? We have few students, we have large spaces, but some of us might have 30, 40 or more students. Who here has like a very large group of students? Oh, I see some hands up. Oh my goodness. How many students? 30, 47, 36. 62. Wow. Okay. Look at that. We're playing like bid wars. I see 67. Who has more? Right? Okay, 120. Exactly, this is one of the difficulties. Not our will and our expertise, but sometimes logistically, it's very, very hard to conduct speaking activities, right? Because we have many students, we have limited time. And this might seem like I'll share this story that I heard from a teacher this year. This teacher said it was his first time teaching kindergarten, and they did a lot of speaking activities. And every time parents would pick up their kids, they would ask, "What did you do in school?" And guess what the kids would say? Nothing. We didn't do anything because they were practicing speaking. Exactly. Teacher Brenda says, well, playing, but playing is how they learn, right? And speaking and doing. But parents wanted to see the activity, the evidence, right? So this can also be a logistical difficulty. Just we need to provide evidence, proof that students are working when they are working, of course, right? But these might be some challenges. And there are good news, okay? The good news is even small changes can make big differences. And we can start incorporating speaking activities in the classroom, even if they're very, very short. Turn to the right 30 seconds, turn to the left 30 seconds, group up and mingle for a minute. Even if they're very, very small, short activities, even if you have 65 students in your classroom, it will get noisy, all right? I'm not saying it won't be a noisy classroom, but noisy classrooms that are productive classrooms are amazing, right? It might not work out the first couple of times, but keep at it. Don't be discouraged by hearing the noise, and maybe it can be a little bit overwhelming at first, but keep it short. Don't skip the speaking activities. If you check your teacher's books and teacher's notes, I often see we have group, pair activity. But in observations, typically we see that be me, the teacher, speaking to the whole group versus getting small groups to speak, right? And again, teachers, I understand it can be difficult, but small changes make a big, great difference, okay? This is just us as teachers. How about your students? And you already told me in the previous poll, I read a lot of anxiety and I read a lot of lack of motivation and I read a lot of lack of confidence. And you know what? I agree with you. Typically, students struggle with speaking because they lack the confidence. I mean, how many of us, when we were studying English, might have felt that way too, right? Fear of mistakes. And as we get older and older, I feel like mistakes get scarier and scarier. Maybe with the young ones, we don't really see it frequently, but whoever has maybe fifth and sixth grade, middle school and above, I'm sure you see this a lot more frequently. Fear of mistakes. How many of us, if we're asked to participate freely, we're always thinking about, oh, I don't want to make a fool out of myself, right? So students feel this way too. And like we said before, sometimes conducting speaking activities might become difficult. So, of course, they struggle with speaking because we don't include enough speaking in the classroom. So, at the end of the day, learners want more opportunities to speak, right? Um, and I'm going to let you guys unmute yourselves so I can hear some of you. Um, I want you to give me an example, maybe a time where you've seen that lack of confidence or fear mistakes was a big problem in your classroom. And what did you do? What have you been doing? What have you been trying to get your students to loosen up and feel more comfortable? So
I got
I let, oh, go for it.
well,
Go for it.
I got one. Me, Alfonso Costa.
Alfonso, go for it,
Yeah.
teacher.
Yeah, and about these situations, normally that is always common and has been passing in all these months that here in the school with some my students are from sixth grade. The principal, something that they are very afraid is about the mistakes. Exactly. I always have exactly the same problem. And when they have done mistakes, I always say, don't worry, try it again. It's in general, it's practice, because if you don't tell them, do it again, they wouldn't have the confidence to themselves to try it again. I always say it is normal to have a mistake. And like an example, I say, I am a teacher, but also I have my mistakes too. So don't worry, it's the most commonly. So that's the reason there is opportunity. You have one, you fail, you have another and another, is continue do it. So I always say, don't worry mistakes, because by the mistakes, we always learn.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Teacher Alfonso. I love it. And we have Teacher Axel with your hand raised. Thank you so much. And go for it too, Teacher Axel.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, for example, the problem that I am dealing with my students is that we only have one class per week. It's a Saturday class, so it's only 4 hours. So we don't have enough time to practice speaking, or maybe if we spend a lot of time practice speaking skills, we don't have time to practice the other skills, and we will not be prepared for the exam. So I am the solution that I come with is that I started to ask my students during the week to send me some WhatsApp audios speaking about some topic that I gave them. So yeah.
Very nice. I love the flipped technique, Teacher Axel. And I read someone in the chat also suggests incorporating homework as well. So very, very nice. Then we have Teacher Maite, Teacher Jessica, and Teacher Sandra. And we'll pause participations for now. Teacher Maite, go for it.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about it, and I think that one of the tools we can use is peer correction. Because sometimes students are a bit shy, and well, nobody wants to be corrected, no? Nobody likes it. So sometimes peer correction is a good way for them to understand better their mistakes. And well, everyone has the student who knows more than the other one. So I think that's a good solution.
It is. It's amazing. And we have a little bit on peer work and peer correction later today. So that was a perfect timing. Thank you, Teacher Maite. Let's hear Teacher Jessica and then Teacher Sandra, and we will move on. Go for it, Teacher Jessica.
Thank you. I always say them that we make mistakes. Me too. So I try to encourage them with a class dojo. It's an app, and I give them points to. Oh, sorry about that. To the participation.
Amazing. Gamification and modeling. And again, we'll talk about that later. So perfect timing. Last but not least, Teacher Sandra, go for it.
Thank you, Diana. One of the things that I do with my students, I do with junior high students, is to get them to present. I get them to write things that they find very interesting. They can write about entertainers, musicians, footballers for the boys because they love football. Then I tell them to come to the front of the class to present. It not only helps them with their speaking, but it helps them to face the audience and they're able to talk. And it has really helped them over time because some of them are now in second grade, junior high, and they have masters in presentation. Some of them are still struggling, but they can talk. They are no longer shy. They make mistakes. They still make mistakes, but they are not overwhelmed by the mistakes. Thank you.
Amazing. And let me hold on, let me disable real quick. There we go. And I think we can learn a lot from Teacher Sandra's example. It's choosing engaging topics, letting them choose what they're interested in presenting, and working with oracy skills too. Not just the vocabulary and grammar, but also maybe standing up straight, projecting your voice, active listening, And the more we do it, the better they get, the more confident they get, right? And if we mix peer evaluation there too, wow, that's a good combo. But again, we'll talk about this throughout the session. But I love how a lot of you already mentioned a lot of the big bullet points that I have for the rest of the session. And of course, you've already shared many, but let's talk about reducing anxiety. And something you've already mentioned throughout is make mistakes a norm, a normal phenomenon. This is something that happens all the time, and mistakes are okay. Mistakes typically have a negative connotation, right? We think of mistakes and we think, failure, humiliation. But if we give it on a positive note, mistakes are just lessons, right? Lessons that we learned and things that we can work on. It's the yet idea. We can't do this yet, but we will be able to, right? And some of you already mentioned we can't be perfect models anymore. If some of you think you have to be perfect, I respect you a lot, and that must be difficult because it's really hard to model perfection, but we can try to model vulnerability. And what does this mean? I'm a human. I make mistakes as well. When I was learning, this happened to me. This is something I do with you teachers. When I was a teacher, all of these things happened to me in my teacher experience. So I understand a lot of the things we're going through, right? And this just really helps students understand that we're all human. Even the teacher makes mistakes. And also remember, we're dealing with students that are Generation Alpha, Generation Z students, and they all have access to technology. So we can't pretend to be perfect and know everything in the books, right? Because now technology is very simple to say, teacher, Google says something different, ChatGPT says something different. So be careful with that too. Vulnerability is actually a leadership trait. It's a great quality to have. And again, you're just building this strong connection, rapport with your students by saying, hey, this is normal, mistakes happen. Something you can do with your students also that has to do with mistakes and just good connection is creating a safe environment. And I'm sure all of you do this in your classrooms. A safe environment means creating connections with your classroom. Like Teacher Sandra said, hey, if they like sports, talk about sports. If they like anime, well, maybe I'm not an anime expert, but I might know, I don't know, Naruto or Dragon Ball. That's a easy way to connect with your students by listening and observing and incorporating. I read in the chat earlier, someone said a gossip session. If that works for you and that makes them want to talk, go for it, right? Something you can do instead of just imposing rules is co-creating rules. I know we have the typical rules, respect all answers, raise your hand, be polite, but we can model, and that's part of oracy. Why is this important? Why should I make eye contact? Right? Why should I wait for my turn? How can I show the rest of the class that I'm paying attention to them? And they can help co-create these rules. This works very, very well with teens, particularly teens and preteens. So if you still see that they're struggling with speaking, try to include them in the rules, creating rules. Or I know rules is a might be outdated. Some of you prefer out like guidelines, and that's perfectly fine. Um, but if you involve them in the co-creation process, you'll probably see better results as well. Now, when we are coming up with ideas or we're looking at our teacher's books and we see that there's a speaking activity, what we can do is make sure that we are tailoring, we're adapting ideas for different students. Typically, we don't have a class where everybody is at the same level, right? Everybody's really strong at speaking and everybody's really strong, I don't know, in writing. Typically, we have higher levels and lower levels. We have differentiated classrooms, right? But if we adapt the activities, perhaps something so simple, just give prompts. I'll give you an example in a second, or give more preparation time. It can help students. Even if I ask you teachers to give me your ideas on a very tough topic, some of you might say, "Oh, Diana, give me 10 seconds. I need to think about it first before I talk," right? Maybe earlier when some of you raise your hands really, really quickly, after some time, you're like, well, you know what? I'm ready to participate too. And this happens in the classroom as well. If you give students more preparation time, or at least some, because sometimes we're not giving any at all, that surely will give them a little bit more courage to put together their ideas. If you ask them to write it down, perhaps, if you ask them to exchange ideas before sharing it with the whole classroom, and again, we'll talk about this later, you might see better results. And when I say prompts, this is what I mean. This is an activity, it's just a show and tell. Show and tell. And they're going to be talking about their favorite hobby. If you have beginners in your classroom, you can give them a template. And this template could be just like, let me see if I can get my laser pointer. Here it is. It could be something like, my hobby is blank. I started it blank years ago. I like it because blank. And they don't have to come up with their own structures anymore. They can just fill it out and they can practice, well, saying it or presenting it if you want to make it a little bit more complex. For advanced speakers who you know don't really need the templates anymore, you can offer additional prompts. So if you already know how to answer these basic, questions, you can add something like, how often do you do this hobby? And of course, the questions will have to do, you'll have to adapt them according to whatever vocabulary and grammar structures you're working with in the classroom. But this is a really quick example on how you can support and challenge students, supporting with templates and challenging those students who don't really need them anymore, or they're able to produce a lot more. So again, this is a very, very simple idea, but it really, really works. Now, talking about engaging students, if we think about student engagement, it's all about how often are my students participating? Not necessarily me doing all the teacher talking, but also involving my students. And guess what? Anytime we have a speaking activity, we should give students a reason to speak. Imagine being asked to talk about something random without having a clear goal. I mean, I think it would feel awkward, right? If we don't have a clear goal, what we have to do, how we have to do it, how long do we have to do it? Do you want me to talk, share ideas, problem solve, share an experience? We have to be very mindful with that, okay? We have to give students a reason to speak. And some of you mentioned this already. If you incorporate gamification, gamification doesn't mean playing video games in the classroom, right? It means incorporating game elements, for example, points or competition. Some of your students might not really like competition. If you have one of those classrooms, perhaps not individual competition, but whole group competition, awarding points, maybe using Class Dojo, we heard today. If you're a little bit more traditional, it could just be giving students little stars. I had a teacher in elementary school. They had a mason jar, right? Just a vase. And anytime we would do something that he wanted us to work on, for example, talking in English, he would just put a little toothpick into the jar. And once we had enough toothpicks, we would get a movie day, or maybe free play games a day. Or something that I really like to do is DJ day. Like if your team wins, you get to be the DJs and you get to choose a music we'll play during a controlled activity. You don't have to spend your hard-earned money. You don't have to look for super expensive rewards. It could just be something like that, assigning perks like DJing the classroom. And again, if you're into technology, of course, Class Dojo and other similar platforms are amazing. And again, you don't have to be too fancy with your award systems. Well, we spoke in English today. Let's add a pom-pom to this glass. Let's add a star to a poster that we have on the wall. And this really, really does help. Not just for small children, but teens and adults can benefit a lot from gamification. And if you have any teens or adults in your classroom and you use gamification, let us know in the chat. So I'm not reading all of the comments out loud, but I do suggest everybody to take a look because we have a lot of interesting participations in the chat, right? Teacher Franco gave us some platforms, Kahoot, Nearpod, quizzes, to conduct games online. So make sure you're reading the comments as well, right? Now, talking about purposeful discussion, I have an example for you. This is just find someone who. Find someone who. The purpose here is information gathering, okay? Information gathering. And this activity is just students will receive a list of prompts. Find someone who likes the same food as you. Find someone who has traveled abroad. All they have to do is mingle, 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 stand up and walk around and talk to people, talk to different peers. Hey, do you like Italian food? Yes, I do. Amazing. And they can write down their names next to the prompt. If you want to make complete sentences, you can write Diana likes Italian food. Whatever structure you're working with, you can get them to practice writing too. You can make this into a bingo. I've done this before with some teachers. You make a bingo instead of just a list, and whoever crosses all the bingo gets to shout bingo and they win. So it feels like a game instead of just an activity. And again, I've done this with teachers in teacher training, so it works there too. This is a very simple activity. You can choose whatever prompts you want, but the idea is for them to gather information, they're talking to each other, they're writing things down, and it's engaging because they're doing it, not just us, okay? Now, remember how we said giving students time to think is important? Brainstorming sessions are a must. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but you can use either electronic platforms, for example, Padlet. If you haven't played with Padlet, it's a dashboard that you can get students to post things. It kind of simulates social networks, and they can comment on their threads, they can post their ideas. This is it seems like they're sticking sticky notes, right? Like post-its on a board, and that's a really nice way for them to brainstorm and comment. Mentimeter is another word cloud tool. If you allow cell phone use in the classroom, whoever works with teens and adults, you can use this in the classroom. And of course, just a raise of hands. That we can't go wrong with a raise of hands, right? Who thinks this? Who thinks that? If we're a little bit more specific with our prompts, instead of saying, for example, what is the most important skill to teach in the classroom? That's an open question. right? And maybe lower level students might have a harder time answering. We can be very specific. Who thinks speaking is the most important? I do. A raise of hands. So after you're done with the brainstorming, they get to maybe pair and come up with an explanation. I think speaking is the most important because, and that's a whole nother story. So don't sleep on brainstorming and preparation time. And of course, encouraging creativity. Anytime you set a creative space, it feels like you're in a low pressure environment. So students feel free to experiment and they don't really mind the mistakes as much because they feel like it's not a, I don't know, like a stressful environment. It's a low pressure environment. And this can really help with confidence and fluency because they don't really mind the mistakes, right? And you can be really, really creative. Here are just a couple of ideas. For example, with role playing, you can get students to pretend they're a celebrity or a historical figure. If you're reading a story, maybe Don Quixote de la Mancha, you can get students to pretend they're a character and you can play kind of like who's this game? Like I am a singer. And we'll do this. You can write down the answer in the chat, okay? I am a singer. I am blonde. I am finishing a worldwide tour soon. My favorite number is 13. Good job. We have a teacher. Teacher, well, I think we have like acronyms or I would need help with the pronunciation, but it is Taylor Swift. Hector, thank you, Teacher Hector. It's Taylor Swift. So you can get your students to play this. It could be one student in the front. You can make small groups. I'm in love with her too, Teacher Hector. But this is just a really fun little activity that encourages speaking. It puts students in the middle. They're the ones conducting everything. And if you have students that have a lower level, you can give them the prompts, okay? They don't have to come up with them. If you feel like you need to give them the prompts, just help them out and the rest have to guess, right? I have another activity and I need just 2 volunteers. If you want to raise your hand, I'll tell you what you'll do in a second. I want volunteers slash victims before I tell you what to do. Teacher Elisa, you're going to be student A and Nicole, student B. Thank you. Let me allow you to unmute yourselves. And Teacher Elisa and Teacher Nicole, you can unmute yourselves. And I want you to read this normally. Just read this dialogue. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Teacher Elisa, you start.
Okay. Hi. Can I have a slice of pizza and soda, please?
Sure, that will be fine. Do you want anything else?
No, that's all. Oh, wait. Can I get some ketchup too?
Of course, here you go. Do you need a tray?
Yes, please. Thanks.
No se escucha. You're welcome. Have a great lunch.
Hey, well done. It's okay. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. So this was just a dialogue activity, right? Very basic. You probably have a lot of these dialogue activities in your books. I need 2 more volunteers. Raise your hand. Just the first 2 get to unmute themselves. And I'll tell you why in a second. Marisol, Teacher Marisol and Teacher Laura. Okay, you were the first 2. Teacher Marisol, you're going to be student A. Teacher Laura, you're going to be student B. You're going to read it again, but I want you to read it as if both of you were very angry. Read the same thing, but read it very, very angrily. And 1, 2, 3, go.
Hi, can I have a slice of pizza and soda, please?
Sure, but that'll be 5. Do you want anything else?
No, that's all. Oh, wait. Can I get some ketchup?
Of
Yeah,
course.
hungry.
Of course. Here you go. Do you need a tray?
Yes, please. Thanks.
You're welcome. Have a great lunch.
Good job. All right. That was a very, very angry customer interaction, right? Retail interaction. Okay. Let me take away muting again. There we go. Woo! So thank you for the great 4 victims because I didn't really tell you what you were going to do. This is something you can do. You can reuse the same dialogue that you already have, but you can get maybe a pair to read normally. And then we have Juan Manuel, one of our great academic consultants, saying, now as if they were in love, right? Maybe now as if you were a 5-year-old kid. So you can have a lot of fun with it too. And you can always exchange partners, not necessarily the same ones. So you're reusing a dialogue. It's low preparation and it's creative. So they don't really mind making the mistakes anymore. Now, to start wrapping things up, teachers, remember how I said we had this really important question, accuracy or fluency? At the end of the day, both of them are needed. I think we can agree. I think we can agree with this. The problem with accuracy or fluency, teachers, is sometimes we do one and we don't do the other. When I say accuracy, this means how are we prioritizing how correct the language is, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. And fluency is how to smoothly and confidently communicate, right? If you think about it, it's like learning to play an instrument. Accuracy is playing the right notes, and fluency is keeping the rhythm. If you play instruments, we need both, right? Both the right notes and the right rhythm. But in the classroom, accuracy is equivalent of correcting and avoiding fossilized mistakes, maybe correcting pronunciation. And fluency is allowing your students to freely practice without necessarily correcting or interrupting to correct. And both of them are important. If we start with fluency, everyone, meaning that we give students many opportunities to talk, we can work on accuracy at the end, not necessarily correcting students and pausing and stopping and, hey, this is wrong. You can do a plenary correction at the end. I heard this. I was walking around and I noticed we were using this structure. We can get our students to correct themselves. Have you ever thought about writing on the board things that you hear? When I was walking around the conversation or the role play, I heard, and you write down the sentence. I'll give you a minute to look at it and correct. And then you can help polish without necessarily interrupting. And there are many techniques for providing feedback for speaking. You can take a screenshot, but at the end of the session, I will be providing you a link that you can scan, a QR code that you can scan, and you can download this white paper. This is a white paper on, well, providing feedback on speaking, because we know it's important. And I know some of you are saying, well, I need some help with correction. And what I do want to point out, everyone, is that we have indirect and direct correction. Indirect correction, you might just say, you know what, student? Let me take someone from here. You know what, Ruth? I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. You're not necessarily saying what? You're giving them the opportunity to reformulate their ideas, right? Or perhaps the teacher using rising intonation to repeat the phrase. Go to school yesterday? Go? And then how we kind of raise our voice or we make faces and then we expect students to correct. The problem is even if you're raising your voice and using your face, sometimes they still won't understand that there's an error there, right? Because they're unfamiliar with it. So we have to reteach. That doesn't necessarily work all the time. And we have, of course, more direct ways of correcting. For example, we specifically mention what needs correction and we explain the whys and the hows. So again, I will be sharing the full white paper so you can take a look at it and you can read it and analyze. But I did want to give you the basics, indirectly or directly correcting students. But be very, very careful when you do this, because if it's a fluency activity, we typically don't correct there. We wait until the end, right? So pick your battles. Don't forget about both. But bottom line, the more opportunities to speak, the easier it will get. And if we overcorrect, we're also risking our students feeling, my confidence level is down. So be careful with that. And again, to wrap things up, I'll give you 3 quick ideas that you can use. The first one being the English zone. The English zone. You can establish English zones where your students can only use English to communicate. This could be during a small group interaction, a class discussion, and in order for this to work, you have to set expectations. You can say, you can ask for help, but you have to ask in English. You can write this down on the board. You can have posters that say, how do you say blank? How can you explain this again? You can use visual reminders. I've seen a lot of teachers have posters. I've seen some of you have traffic lights. Green means maybe only use English or can use Spanish. Depends on how you want to word it. Red means no Spanish or no English, again, depending on how you're wording it. I've seen teachers do that. I've seen teachers use lights, and maybe when a light's turned on, it's the only English zone. It depends again on your possibilities and your creativity. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it really does help. And the best of all, make sure you are acknowledging and praising that they're doing amazing, and you can give them small rewards if they're consistently using English. And again, the words, that doesn't mean you have to spend your money. It could be one of the ideas that we have already talked about. Another one that we really like, and this is an idea that I have shared in the past with some teachers, is my world record in English. This is, you're going to tell your students that the goal is to set a record, a world record, for the longest time they can speak only in English. This could be during just an activity. This could be during the whole class. You're going to set a timer. Most of you, if you have Presentation Plus, you should already have a timer integrated into your Presentation Plus. If your Presentation Plus doesn't count up, there are many timers that you can use online. And the idea is to set a timer that counts up. And you're going to pause a timer when a student speaks Spanish. And whatever time they got, you can write it down on the board. You can have a special poster. And the idea is for them to feel encouraged. If you want to try it again, because I'm sure you have some students saying, teacher, no, again, again. Oh, okay. I'll give you another opportunity. You can set the timer again. And the idea is for not for them to go, ay, fulanito, you spoke Spanish, now we're in trouble. That's not the idea. The idea is for them to feel like they're the ones setting a world record, and it's okay. They can always break the record later, tomorrow. There's no problem. And then you can set challenges like, if you reach 10 minutes, we're going to do this. If you reach 30 minutes, this is going to happen. If you reach the whole class, then there's another prize for you. So this is a very simple activity, but it does help. And last but not least is a classic teachers. Think, pair, share. You give time for students to think on their own. You give students time to work with a peer and compare exchange answers. And then after they're feeling very confident, they share with the whole class, they share with you. And like I said, this is a very, very basic way of grouping students. But if you have a hard time finding opportunities for students to speak, and you have a hard time letting go, because sometimes it's very hard for us to allow students to do things on their own, you can do this activity. And it's very, very short, and you can use think, pair, share for pretty much any activity that you have in your books. If it's not, it's probably already suggested in your teacher's notes as well. So with this being said, teachers, we talked about so many things. I took these final tips from a blog. This blog I will share with you in the next slide so you can read it at your own convenience. But I found these tips really useful. These were taken from our World of Better Learning. And it states, the more we know about a topic, the easier it is for us to talk about it. This is particularly true if you have any science topics. If you're talking about global warming or very difficult topics, make sure to explore it first. Otherwise, students might not be able to talk about it freely because they don't know much about it. Length of utterances. If your students are expected to use long sentences and long phrases, that might be challenging. You can start working with chunks. You can write down the chunks on the board. And the shorter the utterances, probably the easier that they'll be to produce. Give them planning time. This is what we've been talking about, time to think, time to maybe write down ideas and brainstorm before they speak. Because if you don't give them time to plan, they're pretty much just winging it, right? They're just trying to come up with ideas that they might not feel very confident about. And rehearsal time, it pretty much goes hand by hand. Give them time to practice before they present in front of everyone, right? So this is very, very important too. Like I said, teachers, I know we have a lot more to discuss, and you're probably interested in reading a little bit more. So I will be sharing with you these QR codes that are being projected. And if you don't have a camera, I will send you the link in the chat. I'm going to pause the chat for a second, just so we don't lose the message. And you have the links in the chat. If you can't scan, make sure you're clicking on the links. The first link is our white paper giving feedback on speaking. It's a PDF. It's condensed information and it's really good. And the second one is the blog post that I took the final tips from, because I know this says boosting teens speaking, but it's still useful whether you're teaching younger children or adults. And you see it says in large classes. So I wanted to include this because it has a lot of really good tips, tricks, and information. So make sure you're clicking on the goodies or you're scanning the QR code.